Here we pick up in mid-argument now into the second clip. Sister Mary Jane has just revealed her expectations now, and much to Isabel's dismay, who knows the truth about the so-called Reverend Jenkins. We see here that Sister Mary Jane clearly does not want her dreams for her daughter's future to be compromised in any way. We could almost compare her to a hockey dad or a lot of modern parents who try and live vicariously through their children and organize their children's lives and plan out their children's lives for them. This is sin. The teachings in both the books of Proverbs and in the entire New Testament prohibits any form of manipulation of others for our own purposes or for personal gain. So if you see someone who is excessively preoccupied with gaining more for themselves and selfishness and their selfish little life, and yet claiming status as a spiritual giant or spiritual maturity, you will immediately recognize that what they're claiming is obviously a lie. And what I mean by this is specifically televangelists who brag about how close they are to God and yet constantly nag their followers and their viewers to donate them more money so they can buy themselves a second private jet, or that their mansion isn't big enough so they need a bigger one. Approximately a minute and 15 seconds into the clip, we are now introduced to a couple of the Sisters of Ruth, who likely this would be the women that Sister Mary Jane is competing with for status, and hoping that by marrying off her daughter to the pastor, she can be equal or greater to the women of the Sisters of Ruth, or at least impress them. This scene here is especially a highlighted example of what we would consider as selfish ambition. And the book of James says that ambition is wisdom from the devil. It's also self-seeking is basically not the signs of spiritual maturity. James chapter 3 verses 13 to 15 says, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, and of the devil. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice." So this is how we should evaluate televangelists. If they're full of selfish ambition and greed for themselves, it pretty much tells you where the source of their power is coming from. Proverbs 3:33 says that the Lord's curse is on the house of the wicked. And Proverbs 6:16 says there are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him: proud eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a man who stirs up dissension among brothers. Almost all of these could easily describe televangelists, so we can easily see that their claims that they are God's favorites are complete lies. This scene also points out a tendency, a human tendency in our modern, postmodern corporate church, that because it's basically a pyramidal authority structure, it means that are involved in it are always consciously or subconsciously trying to climb to the top of the pyramid to gain control and power over others. Likely motivated by his talk with Yellow Curly the night before, now that Reverend Jenkins has recovered from his hangover, he wastes no time in paying Sister Mary Jane a visit. That look on Isabel's face says it all as she opens her door and sees the Reverend Jenkins sitting in her living room. No doubt he's the last person she expected or wanted to see when she opened her door. Probably Sister Mary Jane set up this appointment, because her pinching her daughter's arms suggests that maybe she has invited the Reverend to come over. At 6 minutes, again, as we remember that Isabel is the one person here in the room, well, other than Jenkins himself, who obviously knows the truth, we're left with the impression of, say, a sheep among wolves. We have to take Reverend Jenkins' word for it when he says his warnings about becoming worldly, because he would certainly know. Drinking and gambling and the other illegal activities he's probably involved in are definitely all worldly activities of which he's an expert in. Again, this part really reminds me of the hypocrisy and the double lives that are probably led by a lot of televangelists, that they're speaking a bunch of rhetoric that they themselves don't even believe when they're extorting all these little old ladies for money every Sunday morning on TV. From about 7:15 on in the clip, we see the so-called Reverend Jenkins' true nature as of a thief and a con man, again carefully hidden by his double life from all of his followers, just as I said, probably modern televangelists can keep their sins and their addictions insulated and hidden from the rest of us. Even the most monstrous sins can be effectively hidden behind the closed doors of a televangelist's mansion, and therefore be kept away from the prying eyes and ears of their followers. This is a real abomination and a blasphemy that causes people to hate God. We are led to believe at about 7 minutes and 40 seconds that Jenkins has got what he wanted, or at least what maybe Sister Mary Jane thought that he wanted. see by about 10 minutes into the clip that Sister Mary Jane has now begun to convince herself that her daughter will soon become a pastor's wife. Note that self-deception is often a powerful tool that's used by many false teachers and false prophets. It might be that Sister Mary Jane gets hungry after she has sex. That's possibly why she's thinking her daughter would be hungry, is I think she is hoping that she has had a encounter with the Reverend. And in this case, I think it's just an example of, again, Sister Mary Jane effectively pimping her daughter out to the pastor in the hopes that he will like her enough to want to marry her. Even though it may not have been intentional, this film does point out at least several of the problems that we have or that we would encounter in religious hierarchies. People that are involved in it are always consciously or subconsciously trying to climb to the top of the pyramid. Another of the very worst features of organized religion is that despite the rhetoric that they preach, the leaders of organized religion don't see everyone as equals, and they teach all their followers to do the same. In essence, to make the judgments on people based on outward appearances and temporal circumstances such as poverty, or which have no real bearing or meaning to someone's level of faith. In this film, several or at least two of the characters make big errors in judgment based on these two very things, and leads to disastrous consequences. For whatever reason, the con man Jenkins does not want to see Sister Mary Jane out here, so he does what he does best, and that is to hide in the shadows. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. So this is how we should evaluate televangelists. If they're full of selfish ambition and greed for themselves, this is why I specifically hate televangelists, because they expect all the little people like us to make all the sacrifices, while they extort money from us for themselves to waste on their basically on their ego, not realizing that when Jesus says everyone who wants to follow him is supposed to deny themselves, pick up their cross, and follow him. And that means every single believer, not the followers and the leaders, are exempt to make up their own rules. At 13 minutes into the clip, we are sort of led to believe that something may have happened that wasn't shown. After being manipulated, we can see here that now Isabel has maybe only mere minutes to make a very important decision that she's probably been struggling with now since before her Sister Mary Jane left to go to the store. But we can say one thing for sure, that clearly Isabel does not want to marry Reverend Jenkins. Sister Mary Jane, however, can't wait to go brag to her two friends and the Sisters of Ruth. As I said before, I really like this film because I think it has a lot of lessons to teach us. To be continued in part 3.